I started a new project, I have a process plan, and I have a little bit of JavaScript that I want to do at the beginning. What do I want to do? Well, I know that my process plan is going to require variables. I want to ask stuff to the user. And so in my script, I want to force pdfToolbox to bring up the Ask-at-runtime dialog with all of these variables that I want to ask the user. Why? Well, maybe because in the same script I want to do hiding or deactivating of certain variables based on others, or maybe I want to set the order of the variables. And so I just want to make sure that these variables are all existing. The JavaScript in pdfToolbox allows me to tell pdfToolbox that I want these variables. And that is done using something in app.requires. And I could just type that, and there is syntax completion, as you know. But the easiest way is, especially if you have never done that, is to look into the insert JavaScript objects. And that brings up this dialog, as you know, and that dialog I can type. So requires brings up all of the lines that contain the word requires in it. And as you can see, there are a number of different ways where I can do this. Let's take one that is very typical for this video. That is the third one. So as the description says, this defines a variable using its key or its symbolic name, as it's called in a lot of the videos that we make, the default value, and a display name or a label that is used in pdfToolbox desktop when the Ask-at-runtime dialog is shown. So let's select that one, and then I can double-click that to insert it into my script. Of course, I get an error because it uses this thing value, which I don't have. So let's fix that. First of all, the symbolic name can be whatever you want, but let's call that var shape as an example. And then I will give the user the opportunity to enter a shape that he wants, but the default is going to be rectangle. That is the default value. That's the second thing I have to pass. And then I pass the label, and the description said the label is the thing that is shown in the Ask-at-runtime dialog. And so I could put something there like, what is the shape you want? Whatever style of text or prompt that you think makes sense in your Ask-at-runtime dialog. How do I know what that does? Well, at the bottom of the dialog, there is a test button. And if I would find my mouse there. This test button shows me what that script does. And because I have as part of my script the app.requires, it now brings up the Ask-at-runtime dialog. You can see that it shows me the label. This is exactly the label that I put there in app.requires. And you can see that it gives me an edit field, and in that edit field, it puts rectangle. That was the default value that I had in my script. Now, it is not so nice in this case that it shows me a text edit field. It would be nicer if it gave me a list of things, right? And then I can choose between rectangle, circle, square, whatever the options are you want to give the user. And that is actually quite simple to fix. So I can say OK and go back to my script. And in my script, I can give a second or fourth, actually in this case, parameter. And let's go back to here and to our app.requires. And then you can see that there is another version of this app.requires that has the symbolic name, has the value, has the label that is shown on the Ask-at-runtime dialog, and then has a value list. And there is a description here of what it can be, but essentially it is a list of options that the user can select. So let's do that. We are just going to add the list in our example here. So where it says, this is the label, as the next element, I will add a list of things, and that will be rectangle. Doesn't really matter what we put here, but let's add one more circle there. And once we have that, let's go back to tests. And now, instead of getting a text area where I fill things out, I have a list of options. And you can even make it more complex, where when I select circle, for example, the variable will not have the word circle, but some other value. So you can have both the label that is shown in the list and the value that is remembered in the variable. In my case, because I didn't use the more complex version, the value and the label that is shown are the same. Okay. What you have to be careful for, and it's a very common mistake, is that the default value has to be one of the values that you have in your choices. I mean, if you give the user a number of different choices, make sure that the default that you specify is actually one of those choices. If you don't do that, you're going to immediately get an error when you launch the Ask-at-runtime dialog, and that is not what you want. It would go too far for this video, but there are still more advanced capabilities that you have, including the ability to have a variable on the Ask-at-runtime dialog where you can specify a file, for example, where you can ask the user to select the path to a file. These are also mentioned in the JavaScript objects dialog, so you can see them there, or you can look in the documentation about how to specify variables for the Ask-at-runtime dialog. And we'll link to the article in the documentation that will help you with that under this video.